Step away from that door, sir. Are you trying to force entry?
I'm unlocking my office. I work here.
That's suspicious. I need to see
It's
ID.
inside on my desk. That's why I'm opening the door.
Don't reach for anything yet.
So I can't open the door, and I can't prove I work here?
I just need cooperation.
You're getting it from the public defender.
Hands. Cuffs.
David Richardson turned the key slowly, the faint click of the lock echoing in the empty hallway. It was just past 10:40 p.m., a Thursday night in Portland's Pearl District. Office lights reflected on glass facades outside. Inside, the hallways were silent except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant elevator chime. He had forgotten his ID badge on his desk, again, and now needed it to access the parking garage. Simple, ordinary, legal. But as he inserted the key, a shadow loomed behind him. "Step away from that door, sir," a voice barked. David froze. Turning slowly, he saw a uniformed officer, badge shining under the fluorescent lights, eyes narrow, chest forward. "Officer," David said, calm but wary, "I work here. I'm unlocking my office." "You trying to force entry?" the officer demanded, taking a step closer. "No," David said, keeping his hands visible. "This is my office. Suite 431. My name is on the door." The officer's eyes didn't soften. "After hours. That's suspicious. I need to see your ID." David's stomach tightened. His ID was on the desk inside. "It's in my office. That's why I'm opening the door," he said, voice steady. "I need it to get to my car." "Don't reach for anything yet," the officer snapped. David's jaw clenched. He had spent 9 years defending clients from unlawful stops, searches, and arrests. Now, the irony was suffocating. Here he was, a trained lawyer, standing in his own office hallway, being treated like a criminal. "I can't open the door, and I can't prove I work here," he said, frustration rising. "I just need cooperation," the officer replied. David's eyes flicked to the officer's body camera. "You're getting it from the public defender," he said quietly, meaning he would have legal counsel to document the violation. The officer stepped closer, hand resting near his belt. "Step away from the door. Put your hands where I can see them." David swallowed. He knew the script. Comply? Don't resist. Black men who didn't comply often ended up hospitalized or worse. He turned slowly, hands raised. "I'm complying under protest," he said, voice clear. "This is an unlawful detention. I am the owner of this office. You have no probable cause." The officer's hand went to the handcuffs. "Turn around." The metal closed around David's wrists with a snap. Pain shot through him, not just physical, but humiliation, anger, disbelief. This was racial profiling in its rawest form. A black professional, standing at his own office door, treated as a threat because the officer's assumptions could not allow him to belong there. A door opened down the hall. A colleague stepped out. "David, what's happening?" "I'm being arrested for entering my own office," David replied flatly, voice tight. The colleague raised her phone. "Officer, he works here. This is his office." "Step back," the officer barked, ignoring her. Backup arrived minutes later. Officer Linda Torres stepped off the elevator, surveying the scene. "What's going on?" Here gestured at David. "Caught him trying to break in. Claims he works here, no ID." Torres looked at the sign on the door, then at David. "His name is on the door," she said quietly. "Could be stolen key," Keir insisted. Torres stepped closer. "Uncuff him. Now." Keir hesitated. The cameras, the witness, the signage, they were all undeniable. Reluctantly, the cuffs clicked open. David rubbed his wrists, fury radiating. "This shouldn't have happened," he said, voice controlled but shaking. "I will file a complaint and a lawsuit. This was racial profiling, pure and simple." Security arrived. "David, what the hell?" the supervisor said, recognizing him immediately. I was arrested for entering my own office, David said flatly. Torres radio dispatch. Cancel backup. Situation resolved. The body camera had captured everything. The accusation, the defiance, the handcuffs. All of it. And it wasn't just about one officer anymore. This was a systemic failure waiting to be exposed. The next morning, the Oregon State Bar Association was in uproar. A licensed attorney handcuffed in his own office, treated like a criminal for simply being black and working late. Complaints were filed. Media inquiries began. Social media erupted with outrage. David Richardson, once a quiet advocate behind courtroom doors, found himself at the center of a story that could change local policing policy. He spoke to colleagues and legal teams. Lawsuit preparations began immediately. The allegations were clear: unlawful stop, false arrest, racial profiling, emotional distress, reputational harm, and a total failure of the Portland Police Department to train officers in recognizing bias. As David sat in his office later that morning, he stared at the handcuff marks on his wrists. It wasn't just a story about him anymore. It was a warning. How many other black professionals had faced the same suspicion in silence? How many had endured it without cameras, witnesses, or legal recourse? A settlement of $2.7 million would come later. Termination of the officer would follow. But that night, alone in his office, David Richardson understood something deeper. Success, credentials, preparation, none of it guaranteed safety from racial profiling. Not even in your own workplace. He picked up the phone and called his attorneys. The fight was just beginning. By the next morning, David Richardson's email inbox was flooded. News outlets had picked up the story, social media was buzzing, and colleagues were calling to express outrage. "David, we've never seen anything like this," one attorney said. "Are you okay?" David rubbed the marks on his wrists. "Physically, yes. Mentally, we'll see." He poured coffee and opened his laptop. Every detail from the night before had to be documented. Every word, every movement, every command from Officer Keir. This wasn't just personal. It was legal, procedural, and systemic. He drafted a formal complaint to the Portland Police Department first. Then, with the assistance of trusted colleagues, he began preparing a civil rights lawsuit. He knew the law well. He had spent years defending clients from unlawful stops, teaching judges about constitutional rights, and challenging bias. Now he had to wield that same knowledge against the system that had just violated him. The allegations were serious: unlawful detention, false arrest without probable cause, racial profiling, emotional distress, reputational damage, and a failure by the police department to properly train officers in recognizing implicit bias. Every claim had to be supported with evidence. Luckily, in this case, the evidence practically wrote itself. Body camera footage, witness testimony from a colleague, security logs, and the visible signage outside his office. David's phone rang. It was his attorney, Tanya Wright. "David, are you ready to take this public?" she asked. "I have to," David replied. "If this happened to me, it's happening to others. We need to show that credentials and professional status don't protect against this." "Good. Let's prepare the filing. I want this airtight. No weak spots." David's office became a war room. Every piece of evidence was cataloged. Emails, building logs, body camera footage. The security guard statements. He even made a detailed map of the hallway, showing exactly where the interaction occurred. Nothing would be left to chance. By Thursday, the lawsuit was officially filed. The Portland Police Department was served. The city attorneys reviewed the complaint and realized immediately that this case was indefensible. Every motion to dismiss would be futile when the body camera footage clearly showed the officer handcuffing a licensed attorney in his own office without probable cause. The public relations impact was significant. News articles highlighted systemic failures, officers' unchecked discretion, and racial profiling. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding accountability. Inside City Hall, meetings were called. Department leaders huddled over reports of Officer Keir's prior complaints, 11 separate incidents in just 3 years, each involving assumptions of criminality based on race rather than evidence. Supervisors had repeatedly failed to act. This was negligence compounded by bias. The settlement for David Richardson was being calculated even before the trial date, and internal memos emphasized the high probability of a jury ruling in favor of the plaintiff. David didn't stop working on cases in his office, but the lawsuit consumed him. He prepared motions, briefings, and interviews with journalists. At night, he met with attorneys strategizing deposition questions. He needed to ensure Officer Keir could not defend his actions with lies or excuses. Every officer involved, every witness who had seen the handcuffing, would be called to testify. The lawsuit wasn't just for him. It was for every professional who had been doubted because of skin color. Weeks later, deposition day arrived. David sat across from Officer Keir, who had been suspended with pay. The courtroom was tense. Cameras recorded everything. Keir avoided eye contact at first. The questions came fast. "State your name for the record," the attorney began. "Describe your actions on the evening of July 15th. Keir recounted the events but faltered when pressed. I was investigating suspicious activity," he said. "What suspicious activity?" the attorney asked sharply. Keir hesitated. He appeared to be forcing entry. David interjected calmly, leaning forward. "Officer, I unlocked my office with my own key. The door clearly displayed my name and profession. How could you not verify this before handcuffing me?" Keir stammered. I thought. I believed it was my duty." "You believed you had the right to violate my civil rights?" David's voice was steady but sharp. The courtroom went silent. The deposition continued, revealing pattern after pattern of racial profiling in Keir's prior cases. Each prior complaint demonstrated the same disregard for procedure and bias-driven judgment. Lawyers for the city were visibly worried. This wasn't going to be a minor settlement. Meanwhile, public outcry grew. News coverage highlighted the video footage, interviews with David, and the testimony from colleagues who witnessed the event. Questions were raised. Why had 11 complaints against Keir been ignored? Why were officers not trained to recognize that black professionals belonged in professional spaces? Could a law be passed to prevent officers from detaining someone at their workplace without immediate verification? David Richardson became more than a plaintiff. He became a public advocate. He spoke at bar association meetings, community forums, and civic panels. "I have the privilege of being able to fight back," he told a crowd. But what about the delivery drivers, janitors, night shift workers, or anyone else who is profiled and has no support? That's what this case is about, making the system accountable for its failures. Back in the courtroom, tensions escalated. Officer Torres, the second officer who had intervened and ordered Keir to release David, was called to testify. Her testimony confirmed everything David had claimed. Keir acted without cause, ignored clear evidence, and would not listen to explanations. The city attorneys, recognizing the inevitable, began settlement discussions. Negotiations were tense. They wanted to minimize publicity. David and his attorneys demanded accountability. He refused anything less than a full acknowledgement of wrongdoing, termination of Keir, and systemic reforms within the department. 8 months after the arrest, the city agreed to pay $2.7 million in settlement. Officer Keir was terminated. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index, barring him from law enforcement anywhere in the country. The settlement also included mandated departmental reforms, mandatory de-escalation training, real-time body camera review, and a civil rights unit to investigate future discrimination complaints. For David, the settlement was not just about money. It was about sending a message. Unchecked bias backed by authority has consequences. The story also ignited national conversations about systemic racism, professional respect, and police accountability. But the scars remained. He still remembered the metallic snap of handcuffs, the humiliation, the anger, the disbelief. That night had changed him, reinforced his commitment to civil rights, and reminded him of the vulnerability even success could not erase. The lawsuit ended, but David Richardson's mission was far from over. He began creating legal resources for others who might face similar violations. He trained attorneys on documenting civil rights violations, prepared public education campaigns, and funded legal aid for those who couldn't afford to fight the system. Even as cameras faded and headlines moved on, he remained vigilant. This was bigger than one officer. It was about ensuring that professional achievement, education, and respect were recognized as valid everywhere, even in your own office after hours. After the $2.7 million settlement, David Richardson returned to his office with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The marks on his wrists had faded, but the memory of the handcuffs, the disbelief, and the humiliation remained vivid. He sat at his desk, staring at the framed law degree on the wall. He had fought for clients who had been wronged, who had been stopped, searched, or arrested without cause. But experiencing it firsthand had changed everything. David's phone buzzed incessantly. News outlets, colleagues, civil rights organizations. Each call reminded him that this story wasn't just about him. It was about accountability and systemic reform. The Portland Police Department was now under national scrutiny. Reports on implicit bias, racial profiling, and police training were released publicly. Policies were rewritten. Officers had to undergo mandatory de-escalation and bias awareness training. Officers were instructed never to detain anyone in a workplace without verified evidence and proper identification. Even with reforms in place, David knew the psychological impact would linger, not just for him, but for others who faced similar encounters. The reality was that money could never undo the trauma of being seen as a criminal in your own professional space. It couldn't erase the humiliation, the dread, or the fear that the next time, it might end worse. Yet, David refused to let the experience make him bitter. Instead, he turned it into advocacy. He created a legal fund for victims of racial profiling, training other attorneys on how to document unlawful stops and navigate civil rights lawsuits. Every week, he held workshops, sharing strategies to hold law enforcement accountable. His story became a tool, a real-life example of how bias operates when authority is unchecked. One afternoon, as David was preparing a presentation for the Oregon State Bar Association, his phone rang. It was Officer Torres. "David, I just wanted to check in," she said. Her tone was sincere, apologetic. "I did what I could that night, but I know you went through a lot." David appreciated the call. "Thank you," he said softly. That intervention made a difference, even if it didn't prevent the handcuffs. Their conversation shifted to discussing how police could improve their approach, emphasizing listening and verification before acting. Torres shared her frustration with how the department handled Keir's previous complaints. They both agreed that systemic change required consistent oversight, accountability, and transparency. Meanwhile, Officer Keir's name had become a cautionary tale. He was barred from policing anywhere, and his appeal was denied once the evidence became public. The officer's brief apology was insufficient to repair the damage. Public criticism, media scrutiny, and internal investigations left him with a career destroyed. For David, it was vindication, but it also served as a sobering reminder. One individual's bias can cause immense harm when left unchecked. David continued his work tirelessly. Every day he stepped into courtrooms to defend clients, now with a renewed sense of purpose. Every deposition he prepared, every argument he made, was informed by the knowledge that the system could fail even those who knew it best. But there were still moments of reflection, moments when the weight of the incident pressed down. Walking down hallways after hours, David would sometimes pause, remembering how quickly normal actions could be misinterpreted. The anxiety lingered. Even with cameras, witnesses, and credentials, he had not been immune. He knew others weren't so fortunate. David began speaking publicly more often. Town halls, panels, and media interviews became frequent. He emphasized the human side of profiling. "I had every advantage," he told audiences. "I am an attorney. I know my rights. I have colleagues. I have resources. And I still got handcuffed in my own office. What happens to those without these advantages? Delivery drivers, janitors, night shift workers, people who look suspicious to an officer trained to assume criminality?" Audiences listened in silence, many taking notes, many recording his words. His story illustrated a reality that statistics and reports often failed to convey. Being seen as a criminal could happen anywhere, even where you were supposed to be safe. The legal fund David established grew quickly. Donations came from attorneys, civil rights groups, and members of the public. The fund provided legal support to individuals who had been wrongfully stopped or detained. Workshops trained attorneys in evidence collection, documentation, and courtroom strategies specifically for civil rights cases. David ensured that people without resources could challenge police misconduct and systemic bias effectively. Months later, during a public forum on police reform, David recounted the night of the arrest in detail. The audience was rapt. He described Officer Keir's accusations, the handcuffing, the witnesses, and the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. He paused before delivering the most critical point. This wasn't just one bad stop. This was a window into a system that allows bias to operate unchecked when authority is involved. Until we address that, every professional, every person of color, is at risk, even in their own office. The forum prompted city officials to implement permanent oversight committees, continuous implicit bias training, and real-time body camera review. These reforms, influenced directly by David's lawsuit and advocacy, became models for other cities facing similar challenges. Back in his office, late one night, David closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and looked around at the familiar space. Suite 431 was quiet again, but the echoes of that night would remain forever. He allowed himself a moment of reflection. The anger, the humiliation, and the fear were still there, but so was a sense of accomplishment. He had taken a personal violation and transformed it into systemic change. As he prepared to leave for the night, he paused at the door, hand on the handle. The same action that once led to humiliation and injustice now symbolized resilience and vigilance. He knew the journey wasn't over, not for himself, and certainly not for the countless others who faced profiling and bias. But in that moment, David Richardson felt the power of truth, accountability, and advocacy. The story of a black attorney handcuffed in his own office became more than a news headline. It became a movement, a lesson in courage, and a testament to the fight for justice. And for David Richardson, it was a reminder that standing up, documenting truth,